Let's take a look at what's happening with house prices. Now, at this stage, the information we have is to do with house prices up to the end of February 2020. The data at the moment doesn't take into account the effect of the coronavirus or COVID-19 on transaction volumes, on house prices overall, and it's expected that there probably will be a drop, at least in terms of transaction volumes and activity for March, due to the measures brought in by the UK government around self-isolation, limiting social contact with people. That is obviously going to have an effect on the amount of business being done in the property market. But for the moment, we can look at what the figures said up until the end of February 2020. And we've continued the trend that we saw in December and January of an increase in house prices overall across the UK generally. Now, the rate of change slowed down slightly according to the Halifax Housing Report versus a bounce that was seen in December and January, immediately after the Conservatives' big election win. But we still see growth in positive territory, with the Halifax Housing Report showing 2.8% growth year on year for the same month last year, and the Nationwide Housing Report reporting that figure at 2.3% growth. So both in very positive territory. Now, the prediction at this stage is that growth will probably sit somewhere between about 3 and 5% consistently year on year for the next 5 years or so. However, that growth forecast from a lot of economic experts did come out prior to the start of the coronavirus and COVID-19 crisis in the UK. So it remains to be seen whether any of those forecasts are updated in the wake of the measures that the government has introduced in the UK and what effect that might have in terms of slowing down the housing market. Now, the one thing to remember is this doesn't necessarily do anything to supply and demand overall. What it might do is it might have an impact on transaction volumes. We may be in a situation where there are people in financial distress, and that could have a knock-on effect to mortgage payments and potentially repossessions later on in the year. Although at this stage, the government has been very much putting pressure on the banks, putting pressure on landlords, putting pressure on lots of areas of society to say that actually this is not the time for things like repossessions, landlords to take possession of properties, banks to repossess properties for non-payment. This is a time for everyone to pull together, give each other some leeway, and the government has announced a number of measures to support that as well. So I don't think there will be any immediate effect at this stage on house prices in terms of big drops. Also, I don't think there'll be any significant increases, because we fully expect that transaction volumes will probably slow down in the coming months while the UK deals with the brunt of the coronavirus pandemic as it stands at the moment. Now, just to give you some ideas of where we were at the end of February, we were in a situation where transaction volume above that 100,000 long-term average, so in good territory, over 102,000 transactions for the month. Mortgage approvals in really strong territory, over 70,000, which is one of the highest levels in the last 5 to 10 years as well for mortgage approvals, showing that the market was really getting a lot of business done in the last month. Buyer registrations up significantly, over 20%. Seller registrations up by about 16%, so probably still more a seller's market than a buyer market. Sales agreed also up over 10% as well. It's reported from the estate agency groups. So up until the main force of the coronavirus, the government measures hit, we were in a situation where the housing market was actually pushing on fairly well. Business was getting done after being in a kind of situation where a lot of people were sitting on their hands because of the uncertainty over Brexit. So, as I said earlier, it remains to be seen what happens with house prices and transaction volumes over the coming months, with all of the measures that have gone in place to deal with the COVID-19 outbreak in the UK. However, I would reiterate that this doesn't upset the balance of supply and demand. It's not like we've got a whole lot of new houses coming on stream. We've got to remember the industry we're in, people need somewhere to live. So it's not going to change that balance of supply and demand. There's still going to be people looking to rent. There's still going to be people looking to buy at this stage as well. I think we'll probably just see a slowdown in the amount of business done in the marketplace overall.